One of the things I just got done doing was cutting the serrations on this 1911 by hand, and I'm going to give some tips and tricks as to how I did that. If for some reason you're a crazy person like me and you want to hand cut serrations on a 1911 because you don't have a milling machine. So prerequisites, if you are going to attempt something like this, is number one, you need to have at least level 60 crafting, and that's when you unlock the ability to file flat. So besides the ability to file flat, you're going to need a couple of tools. The most important tool in this whole operation is going to be a 60-degree triangle file. And as you can see, I took this file and I ground one side smooth. So that side there is completely smooth. It does not cut. On this side it cuts, on that side it cuts. So you can get this Nicholson file. This was like very inexpensive off Amazon. Take this, take it up to a belt sander and grind one side flat. Now this surface here does not have to be perfectly super duper flat. The beauty of a file is that a long, efficient stroke will average out the errors of that surface and give you a nice flat surface anyway. So you can buy the ones from Brownells, the 60-degree dovetail files, but they're gonna want $1 million for them. Frankly, I have one of those, I was using one of those, and this one that I made here was actually better for the task and sharper than the actual dovetail file you can get made from the factory. The other thing you're going to need are at least one set of toolmaker's clamps. These are parallel clamps. These are essentially going to be your fence. You're going to set them up on the slide and they're going to hold your file as like a guide so you can cut that first furrow. And then once you get the furrow started, you can kind of take the clamp off and just file by hand because it'll sit down in that furrow with a safe edge file. The other tool I used extensively to check my progress was a machinist square to make sure that my serrations were actually sitting perfectly vertical relative to the slide. Now, if you wanted to do angle serrations or something like that, it wouldn't be useful for that unless you had some kind of an angle block to go under the slide whenever you checked it with the machinist square. The other thing is, I wanted these serrations spaced about 65 thousandths of an inch, and it just so happened that the thinner blade on this machinist square was almost exactly 65 thousandths of an inch. It was like 64 and a half or something like that. So I basically used this as my spacer, as my guide, basically my standard. So I would file down until my serrations were as wide as the thin blade on this gauge right here, on this machinist square. Other stuff that might be nice, an optivisor will definitely help you see when you're working at such a small scale. So especially if you are older and you're losing your near focus vision, an optivisor definitely helps with eye strain, even if you're younger though. Other stuff that might be helpful is going to be blue dicam, which is layout fluid. So you can actually lay out the serrations on the slide and get an idea of how they're going to sit on the slide before you start actually making permanent alterations to it. And you're also going to want a set of calipers too. That's going to help you lay everything out, and you can set your spacing and you can set the overall width of the serrations and that sort of thing. And last but not least, you're probably going to want some kind of music or something to listen to pass the time, because like everything when it comes to working with a file work is very, very time consuming. It's perfectly capable of making excellent work and having great outcomes and great results. But to achieve those results takes a lot of time and patience. So you're definitely gonna need some patience and music or something to help kind of pass the time. And not only that, when you're filing, it's kind of monotonous. It helps to have something rhythmic that kind of gets you in a rhythm as you're filing. I find it makes me work more efficiently, so.
Know that I would be a liar if I was to say to you, girl, we couldn't get much higher.
All right, so let's get into the theory of cutting these serrations. So the type of serrations I'm going for, of course, are the standard GI vertical serrations, you know, just like John Browning intended. And the original serrations, there were 19 serrations, and they were roughly 65 thousandths apart. I'm sure there was a plus or minus on this by more than a few thousandths, right? The manufacturing standards back then, even today with Colt, I mean, they suck. So I'm sure there's a pretty big plus or minus on that. So you get 19 serrations, 1, 2, 3, 19. So there's 19 serrations, but there's actually 20 lines because the last line is actually formed by the ramp of the final serration. So if you imagine your serrations are kind of this sawtooth pattern like this, the final serration, and that's the rest of the slide. So the final line is actually created by the edge of the last serration. So there's 19 actual serrations in here, but there's 20 lines that you're going to see. And this is important because I actually realized when looking at the TSOS 1911s, they actually have 20 serrations and 21 lines. So I guess someone probably counted the lines and said there were 20 serrations on there when they made their clone. But yeah, that's interesting. The TSOS 1911s actually have one extra serration over the originals, which I did not realize till attempting this project. So as you can see on here, there are 19 serrations and 20 lines. The last line is created by the edge of the final serration right here. So that's what that looks like in practice. Oh, I got some ink on my gun. That's not fun. Now the reason why the 60-degree serration is good or is helpful or is useful, so let's draw our slide surface right here. So this is going to be one side of the slide, this is going to be the other end, and there's going to be an imaginary line right here as we cut our serrations, right, through the entire process. Now when you're cutting this, when you're cutting the serrations, like you might start off with a perfect 60-degree angle right here, right? But then the next one might be slightly crooked. Maybe you don't go deep enough, or maybe the angle's wrong. Right, so let's imagine, these are our serrations, and you can see they're not very even, but the beauty of a 60-degree triangle is we can actually bring all of this down to make it even. So we can see these two are a little bit closer together. So that means what I would do is I would actually solve this by bringing this one further back. So I would cut this serration further back until it's even. So I'd probably take out all of this material right here. And this is the thing about a safe edge file is you can take off material only on one side and deepen this. So I'd take out all the material right here. So now that's going to be more even. Yes, this ramp is going to be larger and everything's going to be deeper overall, but now all we have to do is take everything down to match the depth of the deepest serration. So now I can deepen this one here. So take out all of that material right there. I would then deepen this serration and then also kind of correct the angle a little bit. So you see how this one is kind of cocked a little bit? This one I would correct by first I would take out all this material right here, and then I would go back in and then deepen everything. Like this serration is also a little narrow, so I would actually go ahead and beat that edge back, and then also go deeper overall. So I would actually take out all of this material right here. So then when you do that, now all your serrations are going to be deeper, but we're going to be even across here, and that's all that really matters. Your eye isn't really going to see the fact that there's kind of a wider serration on this end. It doesn't really matter. And some people, it's sort of a stylistic choice. If you look at a lot of 1911s, you'll actually see that the last serration is actually wider than most of them, because when they stick this in the CNC, sometimes the slides are plus or minus a few thousandths in thickness or whatever, and they're going to cut all these serrations to the same depth, and usually that depth is going to be deeper than like the minimum spec on the width of the slide. So if you look on a lot of guns, you'll see that last serration is actually a little bit wider than the rest of them, and that's okay. But the great thing about the 60-degree triangles is that you can push this direction to even out the spacing of the serrations. You can push in this direction to kind of fix the angle, and you can push straight down to fix the overall depth of the serrations. And as long as you have one good serration, that you can make all the other serrations match that one serration by just going a little bit deeper. It's kind of like checkering, where if you mess up in checkering, all you have to do is go a little bit deeper and you'll point up a new diamond. Now the way that we're going to use these Toolmakers clamps is because they clamp parallel like this. What I'll do is I'll take my square, I'll square it up, and then I'll square up the clamp against the square. I know that's a weird sentence, but once I've got that, once I've laid everything out, I can kind of find my start line, and then it's just a simple matter of using this using this clamp as a fence so that I can push my file across it and get a nice straight line. And once you're deep enough, you can take the clamp off and keep going in. Now, if you want to ensure even spacing, like I said, I was using this machinist square as a 65 thousandths spacer. You could actually play what I like to call musical clamps. You just got done cutting one serration, right? You've got one clamp on there. You're gonna take your 65 thousandths spacer and then you're gonna put it against your current clamp. And this is kind of a three-handed operation without a vise, but so I've got my 65 thousandths spacer on there, right? And I've got my old clamp, my clamp that was already on the slide in there. I'm going to put my 65 thousandths spacer in there. Then I'm going to put another clamp behind that. Then I'm going to remove my 65 thousandths spacer. I'm going to take this initial clamp and then I'm going to snug it up against the new clamp and then tighten it down and then remove the secondary clamp. And then I'll be 65 thousandths over from where I started, and now I can start filing and starting the next furrow. So that is a sure way to ensure proper spacing. I think that's a much slower way and very fiddly. So what I was pretty much doing at a certain point was basically just cutting my serration and then using this as sort of a go, no-go gauge. I would sit this down in the serration until I started to see my serration appear on the other side. And then I would just remove the clamp, set it up on the next one, and just kind of eyeball it. And the reason why I would eyeball it is for the demonstration we did earlier, it's very easy to correct them. And not only that, when you're looking at these serrations, your eye is not going to be looking at every individual serration. If we got really, really close to this and you really, really, really inspected this, you would see that some of these are not at the same depth, some of these are not at the same angle, some of these are not at the same spacing. But when you just look at the gun initially, you're not going to see that. Some of these are a little bit deeper, some of these are a little bit taller, but it's the overall effect that we're going for, and you're not going to really see any sort of small, slight discrepancies. So if you just want to eyeball it and use your machinist square, that's absolutely perfectly fine. You could also lay everything out, right, if you wanted to, ahead of time. Lay everything out with your clamps and your square, and then just file to the lines. That's also going to be an effective way. So the other thing I would say, having done this now, is that if you look in the footage, I'm actually working from the back to the front. If I were to do this again, I would actually work from the front to the back. That way I could set up the toolmaker's clamp on the sides of the slide rather than on the top and bottom. Now this 1911 is flat topped, so I was able to set up my toolmaker's clamps on the top and bottom, but most of them aren't. So it's better to be able to use the sides of the slide. It's also going to be a greater bearing surface. It's going to be easier to keep it parallel. So I would definitely have worked from the front to the back if I were to do this again. Also, by far the most important part when it comes to the spacing of the serrations is going to be that initial vertical cut, that vertical line that you draw from top to bottom. So you really, really, really want to make sure that that's not cocked one way or the other. You want to make sure that's 90 degrees. And then you also want to make sure that is evenly spaced with the last vertical line. Because you can kind of play with the ramped portion of it to kind of get it taller or shorter or make up space or draw it back to make the serration look a little bit more narrower. But that initial vertical line that you draw with that file is it's more difficult to correct and more difficult to get even. So you just want to make sure to get that nice and square right off the bat. So yeah, this is just a quick video because I thought it was interesting, and there's not really any other videos out there talking about hand cutting serrations on a 1911. There's one video from Virus a while back, and he was doing it with a round file, but this is going to be more, I think this is going to be a better method if you want to hand cut serrations. Of course, the best way to do this would be on a milling machine. So yeah, guess what? I don't have one of those. So I'm stuck doing it with a file. I got this slide as a blem and it didn't have serrations on it, so I had to put serrations. It didn't have dovetails either. I cut all the dovetails with a file. That is pretty simple. Virus, his video on cutting the dovetails is pretty nice to show you how he laid everything out. And once you understand the geometry of 60-degree triangles, it's all pretty straightforward. Anyways, thank you all for watching. Thank you to my channel members and my Patreon supporters, and thank you to Michael Scott Earl for supporting the channel. And thank you all for watching. Have a great day. This song is fucking awful. Oh my gosh. Holy shit.